Hello and welcome back to Rev Real Estate School. I'm your host, Michael Montgomery, and today we're talking about the fun topic of stress and stress in the real estate industry. And I promise you, when we're talking about this, we're not going to give you some things that you probably already know in handling stress, such as meditation and relaxation and things like that. We're not talking about this. Specifically, what we're talking about is more so when we're feeling stress, and in particular cases when we're feeling stress in the real estate industry. How can we reframe this? How can we look at it in a different way? Because this is a very common thing within our industry. So what are we talking about here specifically? Well, what we're going to be talking about are four different topics, four different ways that we're all going to experience stress in this industry. The first one is financial stress. So generally speaking, we are going to feel financial stress at some point in time in our business, whether we're brand new or whether we're experienced. Now, oftentimes, if we're brand new, we look to these experienced agents and we think, wow, they must not have to worry about this financial side of real estate. Maybe they have to deal with some tricky clients from now and then, but they don't have to worry about financial side. Well, that's not true. As one's production goes up, so does their marketing budget, so does their lifestyle. And so we just have to understand that this sort of stress can happen at any point in time. Now, I remember a specific time where this happened to me. This was a number of years ago. And we were in this period in time where I was working a lot. Like there was a lot of work going on. I felt like I was putting in these extremely long days. However, I didn't really have much to show for it. And I remember my wife looking over to me, and I can laugh about it now, although at the time it wasn't that funny. And she said, we have about 2 or 3 more months here. We have about 2 or 3 more months. And if we do not see a sale, we are going to be in big trouble, as in something significant is going to happen. We'll have to sell something, or we'll have to take on more debt. And so this was a concerning point in time for me because I've had the financial stress as an early agent. I think every early agent does. But then you also start to have this stress as a more seasoned agent. And that's where I felt this. And so it's really not a matter of where you're at in your business. You're going to feel it. So we have to think about this in terms of a reframe. So a reframe works like this. When you look at something that could be presumed as a negative, how can we reframe it as a positive? So we do this all the time with objections. When a seller says that they object to our fee structure, let's say we have a standard or we have a higher fee structure than somebody who we're competing with. So they may say, well, XYZ agent's going to do it for X price. You're doing it for more. And so handling that with a reframe objection handler, we would basically be indicating why paying a higher fee might be in their best interest. So maybe the lower fee agent has to take on more volume, or maybe there's just some marketing that they're not able to do, or they're not able to invest as much time or as much financially into the listing. So maybe there's a benefit to paying a higher amount, as in the probability of you getting a higher price has increased. You'll notice I didn't guarantee you're going to get a higher price, but the probability of a higher price is higher. So that is a reframe. We do these sort of reframes in real estate all the time. So when we're thinking about financial stress, how can we reframe this? Well, one of the easiest ways to do this is to think of this as an opportunity for us to do two things: become scrappy and reduce expenses. Both are things that we have to understand how to do in real estate as our markets go up, as our markets go down. And in fact, in any business, at some point in time, you are going to just have to be scrappy. Like if you've ever seen what happens at a startup under the hood, you have a whole bunch of people doing all sorts of different tasks. They're scrappy because they just can't hire as many people. Now, cutting expenses is another very important concept. Now, generally, when we're thinking of cutting expenses, we're thinking, okay, well, what sort of marketing technique do I want to actually remove? And that's not always what we're talking about. Generally, what we're talking about are lifestyle expenses. And so when we're looking at that credit card bill, and I remember doing this actually, I remember looking at a credit card bill and being like, okay, well, why is this so high? Like, why is this number so high? I look at all of these actual charges, and none of them seem like astronomical, but when I look at the final number, it's really high. And so going through this exercise, which can actually be quite painful, and starting to cross out these things that you need to get rid of, which generally speaking, I find are subscription services. Subscription services can really add up. But this activity of actually cutting expenses, we can reframe this as a positive because at some point in time in our career, we are going to go through this. And so we need to learn how to be scrappy and we need to learn how to reduce expenses. Number two is when you have a close friend, family member, or past client who uses another agent. Now, this one stings. It feels like a total gut punch when somebody uses another agent, but it's going to happen to everybody within our career. Now, the first thing I'll say is this, is oftentimes when this happens, it's a blessing in disguise. So if a close friend chooses to use another agent, that's not because they think you're not going to do a good job. Almost always, the close friend is choosing to go with another agent to preserve the relationship you have with them. They look at you as such a close friend that they don't want an actual real estate transaction to get in the way of that. Now, I know that doesn't feel like that to us, but that being said, oftentimes that's why they're doing these things. So it can be a blessing in disguise. For example, I have lost friends over real estate transactions. A lot of agents have. And so we need to be mindful of the fact that sometimes this is not a bad thing. So the other thing about this concept, though, is it's also going to improve our resilience. So as real estate agents, we should really be going through resilience training because we have to be extremely resilient in the face of hardship. And that can be lost listings, that can be financial stress. We are going to be handling a lot of stress as real estate agents. And so we need to use opportunities such as this. So when we don't get a listing with a friend or past client, when that happens, we can use that as an opportunity to train our resilience in the face of hardship. So if we look at it from that light, it changes the dynamic. Now, the other thing that this is going to do is it's going to help us be two things: tough and soft. So by tough, I mean that your self-worth is not dictated by if somebody chooses to list with you or not. So therefore, you need to be very tough in the fact that your self-worth as a human is not tied to how many listings you have, how many sales you have, what your GCI is, or your bank account number, or anything like that. Okay, that is just completely off the table. And then we have to be soft. We have to be soft in the sense that we have to wish that person well. Now, what you'll notice as soon as you wish them well, this is actually amazing, not just verbally, because oftentimes when we don't get a listing or we don't get a client, what we actually deep down kind of wish is that their home doesn't sell or there's issues with the inspection. And this might be our knee-jerk reaction, but as soon as we can actually internalize that we actually wish that person well, actually hope that they have a positive transaction and things go well for them, your whole psyche is going to change. And you're now going to be operating from a place of positivity, and it's going to change the feeling of that. So although that's hard, I know that is so much more easier said than done when you're in the heat of the situation. Remember this thing. Remember this concept of being tough yet also being soft, because that is going to improve us as we progress. The next one, not knowing where your next deal is coming from. Now, again, this could be a new agent who doesn't know where their next deal is coming from. This could be a seasoned agent who needs to do X number of deals a month, or else they're going to be in a financially challenging situation. So as you can see, that there are some parallels here between this one and financial stress. But this one is actually a little bit more unique than just financial stress alone. When we're thinking about where is our next deal coming from, or we're worried about where our next deal is coming from, how do we actually solve that? We can't just create a deal out of nowhere. Well, what we need to do in this case is focus on inputs and not outcomes. So what I mean by this is a deal is an outcome. When you actually transact, that's an outcome. But what led to that transaction? Well, a relationship. And then from there, how did that relationship form? Maybe you met them at an open house. Maybe you met them at a networking event. So what we have to boil this down to are, what are the inputs that are going to solve this? Well, the inputs are, generally speaking, when you don't know where your next deal is coming from or you're feeling like this, open up your calendar. It tends to be pretty wide open. So generally speaking, we're not out doing listing presentations, working with a bunch of buyers. We tend to have a little bit more flexibility in our schedule when this feeling starts to come up because we're not doing enough. We're not working with enough clients. So here's the solution: fill your calendar. Fill your calendar. So we're talking networking events, volunteering opportunities, open houses. You need to fill your calendar with conversations, opportunities for conversations. And this one will solve itself. This will solve itself if we focus on the inputs. It really is a starting. It's a conversation. That's where this all starts, is a conversation with a human being. Now, you'll know this. It doesn't necessarily matter if the conversation's in person, over text, over email, over DMs. What really matters here is that we're increasing the number of conversations that we're having. So fill your calendar when you are feeling this type of stress. It's also just going to distract us. But on top of that, these are inputs that lead to the outcomes of a deal. And finally, not getting a listing. So kind of similar to not getting a friend or a past client or family member to use us. But then there's just generally the stress of, the listing presentation seemed to go well. I think I did everything right. I priced it well too. Everything was smooth, but I didn't get the listing. So when you're in that situation, it's not like a friend not using us. Instead, it's like the consumer for some reason had an issue with what we were presenting. So here's the thing, is a lost listing is not a lost client. What do I mean by that? Well, there have been times in the past, and one in particular that's coming to mind. This was 2017, 2018. I did a listing presentation, beautiful house. It was out of my league for that time. And I think the seller may have known that because they went with another agent, but they were extremely polite. And what they started to do was, this listing was a little bit out of my league because it was definitely a luxury listing in an area that I don't tend to do a ton of transactions. And I was upfront and honest with them about that. And they eventually went with an agent who had done a lot of deals in that market segment. And then they started to send me referrals. They sent me I think it was their nephew or something who was buying his first home. And so at the time, these were like the clients that I was dealing with all the time. I wasn't dealing as much with that segment. And so just because that listing didn't work out, they still ended up sending multiple clients, which then led to more clients. So this then led me to believe that understanding that not getting a listing does not mean you're not getting the client. Now, on top of that, we may have experienced this on both ends of the spectrum, but when they go and list with somebody, let's say they didn't choose you because they thought your price was too high, let's say. Well, ultimately, if they go to market and they realize the market is also determining their price is too high, they're going to have an issue with the agent that said they could get X price, and they're going to come back to you and say, you know what, you were right all along. Let's do this thing. So a lost listing is not a lost client. Now, the next thing that you should do, and this is something we've discussed before, and you've probably heard this before, is let's get feedback from the seller, why they decide to go with another agent. But what I find with this, when I just say, can I have some feedback? They kind of give you that surface level response. They're not really getting into the depths. Like they may say, somebody's doing it for a little less, or, it's a close family friend. Like sometimes you'll hear that and like, okay, well, I can't really argue that. Like that's a close relationship. Okay, I get it. But they're not telling you everything when they say that. Almost always. Sometimes they are. And it's not because they don't want to, it's just because they feel uncomfortable giving you any sort of critical feedback. So we have to open that door for them. So how do we do that? We simply say to them, if you could just be please dead honest with me why you didn't select me, and do not hold back. You will not hurt my feelings. I'm coming from a place of wanting to learn, grow, and improve. So please be as critical as you need to be. This actually helps me. So what you're probably thinking here we are talking about stress. Isn't this like extremely stress inducing? Well, not really, because as soon as we're getting feedback, we can actually improve so that the next time we're different. Whereas if we're not getting the feedback, okay, so maybe we don't feel that little sting of somebody saying, look, your presentation just wasn't that crisp. But you know what? I would much rather get that feedback and work on that than go and do the next presentation and not be as crisp. So we just need to open the door to ensure that they're comfortable providing us with open, honest, and critical feedback. And when that happens, I find that that's best done over the phone. It can be done over email. It can be done over email in the sense if you want them to kind of think about it a little bit more. But generally, I do like the phone because it allows me to very easily interject and ask follow-up questions. Oh, tell me more about that. How could I have done that a little bit differently? Was this section a little bit too long? And then you're almost thinking of the seller like a thought partner, which is actually an interesting place to be because they then kind of see you as this person who's willing to improve and work hard. And if they have a bad experience, you are definitely going to be their first choice. So again, with this concept, we want to come back to this idea of being tough but soft. So we want to be tough in the sense that this is nothing to do with my self-worth as a human. Zero. I could get no listings. I could literally do listing presentations my whole career and get 0 listings. It has no impact on who I am as a person. That being said, we also need to be soft and we have to wish them well. We just have to wish them well and hope that they have a good experience. And again, as soon as we do that, that's just going to change. I don't know why, but it just changes the way that we feel about the situation. We go from not wanting them to do well to wanting them to do well. It just changes our whole mindset. And I wish I could understand why, but all I can say is it definitely works. So those are 4 situations that you may encounter and ways that you can start to overcome the stress in real estate. Thank you very much for watching or listening to this episode. And remember, you can reach out anytime at revrealestateschool.com, or I'm on Instagram at the.michael.montgomery. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next lesson.